Okay, so let's just get started then.
Okay.
So for those of you who don't know you and haven't had the pleasure of attending a workshop with you, I wanted to start with a few questions just to help people get to know you a little bit better. So what is the best piece of advice you've ever received as a head teacher?
It's interesting. When I was still teaching in a city school in just outside of New York City, I had an administrator. That's what we call, an administrator that told me I should go back and get my master's degree in school leadership. Only at the time they called it school administration. I remember looking at him and saying I would never be a school principal, because that's obviously what we call head teachers here. And so a few days later, I was working out at a gym with these, and I always saw these two guys who were retired teachers, and they knew my principal. And when I told them what he had said, they said, "What if you could be the principal you want to be and not the principal you have to be?" And I would say that was advice that was given me back probably in about 2000, 2001. It was definitely advice that stayed with me for a long period of time. And I went back to get my degree in school leadership because I felt like, you know what, I think they're right. I don't need to be the principal that I sort of perceive principals to be. I could really be the principal that I wanted to be. And I wasn't quite sure what that was going to look like, but I knew it had something to do with being in classrooms and building relationships with kids.
Yeah, nice. I like that. What if you could be the principal you want to be, not the one you think you should be?
Yeah.
So following on from that, what's your most memorable experience so far in your whole career?
Wow. I have so many. I taught for 11 years, and then I was a school principal for 8. And then I've been in this role as a consultant and author for 6. I think overall, for me, it was the relationships I built with students when I used to teach. It's funny because when I graduated from college, I wanted to teach maybe 4th or 5th grade, and I ultimately got a job teaching 1st grade, and I had 30 first graders, and it was incredibly wild. I was exhausted every day. I thought I was dying from a horrible disease because, it's like working in a petri dish. But overall, like getting to know kids that were coming from tough backgrounds or building relationships with parents, definitely a highlight for me. And then as a principal, I loved being the school principal. I really, just once again, it was the relationships that I think have always been really important for me. So whether it's the parents or the kids, and it's funny now they find me on Instagram or Facebook and all that stuff. And I think a couple of things like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how old I am that they can find me. But the relationships you can build with students and parents and teachers over a long period of time is one thing that I will always appreciate from education, because you just learn so much from working with people that maybe have diverse thinking than you do. Yeah. And then obviously in this role, as a consultant, one of the best things for me is, once again, the people that I've met. You and I met many years ago, but also working with John Hattie. John has really, he's been a mentor for me. He's taken me under his wing. He's introduced me to different ways of thinking about research. And he is also one of the main reasons that my leadership work really started to kick off, because of the thinking that he inspired in me. And then I just started doing so much research around there that, working with John will always be a highlight as well.
Yeah. As you said, lots of great highlights there.
Mm-hmm.
And as you mentioned, we've worked together a couple of times now in Scotland. So I'm just interested for our colleagues out there in Scotland, what are your lasting memories of Scotland?
Oh, God, there's so much. My brother dated a girl from Scotland, as you may or may not remember, from the 90s. And, we've been on Facebook with her family for years, even though they broke up in the 90s. So I always had sort of this impression of just incredibly friendly people. And then when I went there for the first time, it is an incredibly beautiful place. We're not used to seeing castles so often in the States. But also, and I know in the last question I talked about the relationships, but honestly, the people have been absolutely amazing. Incredibly friendly, warm. Can't always understand you, but I just I love coming to Scotland. So I've spent some time in Edinburgh and Glasgow. So just I think that the impression that I've always left with is that anytime I've been together with people from Scotland, there's been this deep thinking, which has been really great during workshops, where they've asked deep questions, they think of things deeply, but also just the friendliness and warmth of the people is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, we do pride ourselves on our warmth of welcome.
Because the weather might not be so warm, so the welcome definitely is. But no, I love, actually my screensaver is, has been for the longest time. It was the shot that I took outside of my hotel room, or a hotel room window of the castle, of Edinburgh Castle. So it's beautiful, beautiful country.
It is, it's gorgeous, but as you say, the weather not always the case. There's no such thing as bad weather, just the wrong clothes.
That's right. I remember you saying that, so I'm always well prepared when I show up.
Yeah. Okay, so thinking a bit more about your work around leadership and your work with school leaders, and obviously you've had the privilege of working with school leaders around the world. I'm just interested in why you believe so strongly that collaborative leadership is important.
As a teacher, I've worked for top-down administrators, and it didn't always feel good. As a principal, I did not have any assistants or VPs. It was just me as the principal and then staff. And I never particularly thought that I was smarter than the staff. I thought that we were all smarter together. So a very personal reason for believing in collaborative leadership is because I know it works. We went through great times as a school, and then we went through major budget cuts and school consolidations. And my staff was there every step of the way. We just, we worked very well together. We challenged each other's thinking. So I think I just have always sort of had the mindset that I am better off doing things with people than doing it alone. Mm-hmm. And overall, when I started looking at the research that way, what I know is that no matter what country we're in, schools are facing some pretty serious issues, whether it be trauma from students or budget cuts in different parts of the world. Those are things that administrators cannot do alone, nor should they. And in fact, I think that our staff is our best resource. And that's how I always felt about my staff. So that's where my feeling around collaborative leadership comes from. I think the thing that makes collaboration deeper, and this is research that I started to look at when I was writing collaborative leadership and then the school climate book that followed, was the idea that it's not enough to just, say we're going to get together and meet, because people call that collaboration. It's really about co-constructing goals together. It's really about the evidence we collect to see what's working. It's really about teacher voice and student voice. So it's all of those things that also happen to be a part of, collective efficacy, which is really that streamlined, very deep look at collaboration.
Yeah. And so linking to that, I suppose, a bit, one of the things that we focus a lot on in Scotland is how we build leadership capacity. So how do we grow our team's leadership capacity? Mm-hmm. Do you have any insights that you can share with us about how we go about that?
Yeah, that's something that I've been looking at a lot lately, because not only did I have newer leaders that would show up to workshops, or still do, but I also found that I had instructional coaches or teacher leaders, or, we have department heads. And one of the things that I found through conversation with them during the workshops is that they're put in this leadership role, but they don't have an administration background like I do. They weren't a school principal or a head teacher. And they may not have even done a degree in school leadership. So this idea of growing capacity or growing leaders is very important. And so one of the things that I definitely look at is how school leaders can coach the people around them. So I've been looking a lot at, and I know this is one of the things that John and I will be presenting on when we're with you, is the idea of collective leader efficacy. How does a leadership team function together? And one of the other reasons why I'm looking at this so deeply, and I have in my coaching work as well, is that many times the head teacher or the school principal might have a VP, but that VP is typically responsible for doing discipline. So when they become a head teacher, they really lack that experience to be an instructional leader, which is an important piece of the leadership puzzle. So the whole idea of coaching those people up is really important. The idea of collective leader efficacy is really important because it means that you're starting to tap into their strengths. And sometimes in the leadership coaching work that I'm doing, we really go into specific questions that those people can ask during their department meetings or their PLC meetings as well. So sometimes it's even being that specific and purposeful about what kind of questions can we ask when we're with our colleagues, because that part, I would say, is the hardest part. In fact, the research around collaboration shows that collaboration doesn't work any better than if we did it on our own, because we don't challenge each other's thinking. So that idea is really about how do we get all these individuals to be able to challenge each other's thinking, and that's definitely something that we work on as well.
Yeah, I think often we can be too nice to each other.
Yeah, I read it one time in a journal. They called it the land of nice, and I was like, yeah, and it's hard because you don't want to. I mean, it's supposed to be not a knockdown drag out, but I often use the example. My friend Jenny Donahue, who you know very well as well. Yeah. Jenny will just look at me and say, I have a wondering, and I'm like, oh gosh, here it goes. You're gonna ask me a question I can't answer. And one time I mentioned this in front of her, and she said, hey, I'm just asking that because I really do have a wondering. But I think it's just that wonderful nature about her where she really does have a question to ask, but the way she's doing it makes you feel less threatened.
Yeah.
And that's sort of a space we have to be able to find ourselves in too. How can we feel less threatened when somebody does ask us the question that maybe we can't understand or we can't answer, and how can we develop that answer together?
Absolutely. You touched on instructional leadership there, and I've spoken with lots of school leaders, people working across local authorities and across Scotland who know and understand the importance of instructional leadership, but really struggle with how to be in instructional leadership. Does that resonate with your own experience of working with school leaders?
Very much. In fact, by the time I, get to Scotland with you, my new book will be coming out on instructional leadership, which you have read. And that book, where it came from is I had written Collaborative Leadership, 6 Influences That Matter Most. Instructional leadership was one of the influences because you can't, as a leader, spend your whole time on instructional leadership. So what I wanted to focus on was how can you carve out a little time to be able to focus on that. I kept getting asked to go deeper and deeper, and that's where this new work on instructional leadership came from. In fact, instructional leadership is one of the most researched forms of school leadership over the past 50 years. But many of the researchers called it the black box. They know it has an impact, but they don't know why. I think what happens, and I'm in a very fortunate position because I work with researchers, I've done research, but I also, I coach leadership teams at least 1 week a month, one in California in the US, which is great. And they have things like gang violence that they're dealing with, or trauma, or budget cuts. And so you hear researchers say, this is what you should be doing in the school, but unfortunately not all researchers have a leadership background. So I think it's easy to say what you're supposed to be doing. It's a lot harder to put it into practice. So part of my job is to find the happy medium and really listen not just based on my experience as being a school leader for 8 years, but also really listening to those questions that leaders have when they're asking me, like, how do you put this into practice? And there have been times that I've been able to say, you know what, give me an hour a day that we, and I even talk through, where is there sort of this lull in your day where we can practice this? And then, as you know, what I started to focus on was the idea that instructional leadership is really about some very specific things, about how we implement practices. It's because we don't always do a great job of that. We're often activity rich but impact poor. The second one is when we're looking at things like knowledge dimensions or a focus for learning. The knowledge dimensions are factual, procedural, conceptual, and metacognitive. Because I think that when leaders are doing walkthroughs or learning walks or whatever they want to call them, it's important to have those tangible things to be able to look for. Another one is student engagement, where we talk about why students feel alienated, typically because they don't feel an emotional connection to our school community, and also because of the fact that they feel powerless. They don't feel like they have a voice in their own learning. And then we go into things like instructional strategies, and then efficacy is another biggie, and then evidence of impact. What kind of evidence of impact are we collecting? Mm-hmm. So those are the important pieces for instructional leadership, but it's really based on talking to individual leaders and saying, what part can you start with? What might this look like?
Yeah. Good ideas. So we're really excited to have you back in Scotland in March.
Yeah, I'm excited to be back. I always go there in March.
I know.
I've always been there in March.
Yes, it's not the best time of year, but you know. And this time you're going to be sharing the day with Professor John Hattie, who we know is a good friend of yours. And something that people might not know is that John and his now wife Janet got married in Las Vegas in the summer, and you performed the ceremony.
I did. Yeah, I know what you're getting to, and I'm trying to. So John found out that I could officiate weddings. So we made this plan about 9 months before the actual ceremony, because when he proposed to Janet, she had no idea it was coming. So it's obviously, you were there. It was at this big reception, and there were like 250 people, and he got down on his knee. And what they didn't realize is that John has a particular fondness for Elvis. So when he asked me if I would officiate the wedding, he also made the stipulation that I would have to dress like Elvis. And I don't dress up. I don't dress up for Halloween. I'm really unfun. So this was, I remember it was probably about 3 weeks before the whole event was going to happen. And I sent him an email and just said, so are you sure that you want me to dress like Elvis? And he wrote back, yes, please. And I was like, oh, I'm really doing this. So it was you talk about memorable experiences over my career. I guess that would be one of the most memorable experiences that I've had.
It was certainly memorable for those of us who were witnessing it and couldn't quite believe our eyes on lots of levels. So obviously we're excited for March. We don't have any weddings planned, but you know, if we officiate, we'll give you a shout. But what are you most looking forward to about this conference?
I just think coming back, hanging out with you, meeting everybody. Honestly, I don't care that it's March. I know that I've only been there in March, but I just love coming to Scotland. It's like I was saying earlier, just the people are really awesome to hang out with. I feel like I'm in a very fortunate position because I live an hour away from where I grew up. I never flew until the first time I ever flew on an airplane. I was 26 years old. So this whole life that I live, what I came from, it's a pretty unique experience to be able to travel around the world and show up in places where you're actually seeing friends who feel like family. Yeah. That's pretty awesome. So it's not only the work. Yes, the work is awesome. Like I love being able to meet people and talking about leadership and and getting their understanding and their questions and that stuff. But it's also just the people that I get to see is I'm really very much looking forward to.
Great. And what learning will the delegates take away with them from that day, do you think?
So I'm going to try to find, I always try to find a way to be very practical, but also research-based. So I write, for about 8 years now, I've been writing the Finding Common Ground blog for Education Week, and that's primarily been my job, to take research and find the practice to match up with it. So what I am hoping is that they will not only get the research base, which they'll definitely get from John as well, but they're going to walk out with some practical strategies and also some questions to ponder about their own leadership as they're leaving. I'm excited to dive into the work around collective leader efficacy. That's some new learning for me over the past few months. So I think there's that. I think there's the research, the practical side, and also some really good questions they're going to have to ponder about their own leadership.
Yeah. And you talked about how you feel about coming back to Scotland, but how will our delegates feel at the end of the day?
Hopefully not exhausted. I'm hoping, sometimes when I'm with John, I feel like I'm taking a drink from a fire hydrant, but we've really worked that out to find a great deal of balance. So what I'm hoping is that the delegates will actually leave with a pretty deep understanding, because they're obviously coming in with a fairly deep understanding as well. So they're going to leave with an even deeper understanding, but I think that they're also going to leave inspired. That is my job. It is not to completely exhaust them. I think my job, especially this day and age with the rhetoric around education around the world, I think they need to be able to leave very proud of the career that they've chosen to be a part of. And I think they need to feel inspired to go deeper with it.
Yeah, love that. Yeah. Okay, so just to finish off, we're going to do a quick fire round.
Okay, we can thank Judy for this one.
We can thank Judy for this one. So I'm going to give you 2 options and you've got to choose one.
Okay.
So, these are really tough questions. Pizza or burger?
Pizza, for sure.
Mountains or coast?
Ooh, I live near the mountains, but I love going to the coast. How's that? Did I answer one?
Yeah, that's okay. We'll let you off. Running or rowing?
Running, because I'm a former distance runner.
Cat or dog?
So, believe it or not, this is where people are going to think I'm odd. I did not preface this before we talked, because I have never had a pet in my whole entire life.
Wow, okay.
I have never had a pet. So apparently my family had a couple of dogs before I was born. I'm the youngest of 5. And then they never had a pet again. And my brother said it was because they had me, they didn't need one. So a little offended by that. But if I had my way, it would be a dog.
Okay. Snow or sun?
Well, I'm going into winter here in upstate New York, and it is a beautiful, beautiful scene, but I prefer the sun.
Book or audiobook?
Book.
Music or podcast?
Music, for sure. I can live without a lot of things like television, but I cannot live without music.
Salt and vinegar crisps or cheese and onion?
Ooh, salt and vinegar.
Haggis or black pudding?
Is there seriously a choice there? So here's the thing, and I'm afraid to tell you this. I've never had either. I know. I feel like this is in my future.
It is now.
It's going to be haggis with a side of black pudding.
Absolutely. All right, brilliant. Well, that's my plan sorted for March. I've got to find you some haggis and black pudding.
And unicorns. You
and
promised unicorns.
Yeah, and unicorns. Promise you a unicorn.